Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Everstage's Go to Master Show, Season 3. We converse with RevOps and GTM leaders from some of the most successful companies today and learn from their unique stories. Joining us today is Daniel Morris, Head of Business Ops and Analytics at Proofpoint. Thank you for being here today, Daniel. Could you please share a little bit about yourself to our listeners?
Hi, AB. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited. I think my path has been a little unconventional to get to where I've been. I've gone through a lot of different industries and seen a lot of different scope in my roles. And I think that has helped me get to where I am today by really combining these different perspectives in different industries and different kind of technologies and honestly different cultures in different cities on where I'm working. So I'm really happy to be here today.
That's quite rich and diverse. You moved across industries, starting with customer analytics at Ralph Lauren and MCM Worldwide, and now leading business operations and analytics at Proofpoint. When you made the shift, what were some of the key differences you noticed in how data is used, and how did you adapt your approach?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of different differences, both in a New York perspective, which is where I was at Ralph Lauren and MC, and then a San Francisco and Bay Area perspective. There's also, which is where I'm at now at Proofpoint, there's the fashion and retail perspective versus what is happening in tech and cybersecurity in particular, a very technical field. And then there's also a business model difference of direct to consumer versus B2B. And all of those have done a little bit different. I think starting with the cities, New York, I have found, especially when interviewing candidates and for the team and while you're building a team, it is very easy to find people that understand the business and the impact that they're doing, but harder to find those hard technical skills. San Francisco is different. It's the exact opposite. There's a wealth of very extraordinarily talented technical folks. And if you can find someone that also has that business mindset of what is this actually trying to drive, that's a little bit harder. And if you can find those candidates on both sides, then you have a fantastic team. Moving from the business model of direct to consumer, in retail, you don't necessarily have as depth of information on who you're reaching out to. You're really casting a really wide net of a consumer that is wanting your brand, essentially. And your interaction with them is either through your website and a digital presence, or it is going through a sales rep or a sales associate at a brick and mortar store. It's a very different experience where you have from a B2B world where you have a sales team who is literally developing and cultivating a relationship over years and knows a lot about that customer. So that's a very different use of data because you have more of it on your customer. And that was a big change for me. But at the end of the day, retail and fashion, people that tend to gravitate towards those industries and the people that you're working with are very well versed on who is their customer. Ralph Lauren and MCM are very good at identifying we want to create a product or a brand for a particular lifestyle, a particular aesthetic, for a particular person. And so they always start with who do we want this, who is this buyer? Ralph Lauren himself would actually talk about his process where he thinks about movies and then he draws pictures of who he thinks the characters are in these movies and then designs the clothes that they would wear. So again, starting with that, who is the customer is very, very strong in retail and in fashion. Moving into tech, we always have an idea, but we also want to be very broad. And so I think the technical teams struggle a little bit more with identifying who is that customer. We know what the industry is, we know kind of the size of the market, but really what is that underlying part that we're trying to solve for before we start designing is always a little bit more difficult. So I think that use of data and where you're starting from is very different. Ending up at the same place, but it's really that starting location and which direction you're bridging from is a little bit different between the two.
That's a nice and unique perspective on cities, talent pool, and industries. You built and led a team that grew from just three to tens of them, like influencing 50 people, supporting Proofpoint's scale to over 2 billion in ARR and its 12 billion acquisition by Thomas Bravo. What did it take from a business ops and analytics standpoint to support a company through that kind of scale?
Yeah, it's easy when you don't have a large team. When it's only the three of us, four of us, including myself, you can have a conversation, get everyone in one room and talk about it. As you continue to scale, and at Proofpoint in particular, it's a lot of different teams developing that muscle of analytics as we start embedding it into their day-to-day process and their operations. It becomes more about the coordination and becomes more governance related. It becomes when we define this metric, what does it actually mean? What is that actually pointing towards? And how do we get everyone aligned on that? We went through a process recently that we're calling the metric trees, where we're starting with what is the overall goal of the company, ARR. How do we break that apart into different components to align everyone's job and function to drive towards that ARR goal? Or on a cost saving side, something more like a margin. And so if you can relate everyone's function to that, then you can really start driving on where are those constraints that you need to solve for? Where are the big picture things that we need to go tackle and work with those teams and then the analysts embedded in those teams to help measure and define that. So then you can start really driving not just a measurement of what happened, but really start looking forward of what should we do and driving that strategy. And even as we started scaling bigger, we had to start looking at as you start saturating your market, as you start getting really good footholds and you're getting that traction and product market fit, how do you zero in again on that customer that you need to go after to drive the strategy of what you should do as a company as well?
Great. One size doesn't fit all. You spoke about moving beyond using data for measurement and instead using it to drive strategy. How has that approach influenced the way your team supports different parts of the business? And what are some examples of decisions or actions that came out of that shift?
Yeah, it's shift is, I want to just highlight that word. It's a shift in mentality. It was not overnight. It wasn't even necessarily needed when I started at Proofpoint when we were less than a billion in size. But now that we're two and looking towards the future, it is a shift. And for me, it starts again with the customer. It's trying to move that needle that we were talking about earlier to say, let's start with the customer. Let's figure out when we want to create an offering, who is that for? And embedding that into the conversations across product marketing, across the product teams, marketing, sales, finance, and having an interlock across everyone. That if we're starting with what we're calling our ideal customer profile and working down from there into what is actually our target customer. Because an ICP, everyone likes to talk about ICP, they can be overly broad. You can have your ICP be everyone in the US. But if you then go down to what is a realistic chunk we can do today or this year or this quarter, then you can start measuring around how do we create programs to go after them and having those metrics up front and setting that stage for it to filter down is really how you drive that strategy. Um, what we've gone through in the last couple of years at Proofpoint is starting with let's take our existing pool of customers and let's take the overall market and let's segment them into their relationship with Proofpoint. Then we can observe how are they interacting with Proofpoint and what kind of metrics and behaviors are we seeing. So we can classify those customers into what behaviors do we want out of our customers. And then what is the change in the relationship that is driving that behavior we want? And that's how you can really start driving this strategy. Because once you can identify the behaviors that you want in the customer, then that's when you start creating programs across sales, marketing, product, offering, any of the go-to-market function to incentivize those behaviors. And that's when you're driving the strategy.
The shift starts from the customer. I can feel a lot of customer obsession. You work closely with GTM and product teams. What have you learned about earning trust across those functions so analytics becomes part of the planning process, not just a follow up exercise?
Yeah, I like to always start with getting them on board with the customer idea. But once you have that down, the trust is really important to be a partner with them. You want to come and join these conversations, not as saying, I will show you the light, but I can help you achieve your goals. It's all about that mindset and that almost service leadership perspective of saying that we're in this together. Let's help us achieve the same thing. I want you to be successful. You tell me what you're looking to do, and I'll help find ways to make that happen.
Now, I have a question on AI as well. Everyone is thinking about AI and how it fits into analytics and operations. From your perspective, what are the most realistic ways you see AI starting to impact how GTM teams work with day to day?
Yeah, I love this question. Thanks, AB. This is can be so broad. We could spend an entire podcast just on this. I think there's several different domains. There's workflow, which is the obvious thing that a lot of people are attacking with AI. It's how do you create scripts? How do you create practice scenarios for your sales teams? It's using AI to help do some of the analytics for you. I think for my team in particular, what we want to explore is traditional analytics is set up to answer a particular question. Every time a question comes, you have to run a new analysis. What we want to do is change that paradigm and start creating not just self-service analytics, so that way I can give you assets so you can answer the question, but almost taking AI as a replacement for some of the like the low-level analyst questions. So that way, if you have a question, you can go and ask the AI instead of needing to rely on a broad team of analysts to answer. So you're changing that paradigm from fixed assets answering specific questions to let me explore the information as an executive to understand what is really happening. I have a question, but I'm not quite sure how to tackle it. And so the AI can help bridge that gap for them. And then the analyst team is going to change more towards how do we actually structure the data in a way that makes sense? How do we create those definitions and those data assets that can be used in that fashion?
Awesome. Are there any specific resources, books, or podcasts that you would recommend for someone looking to scale their career in BizOps and analytics?
Yeah. So my favorite books in this area are The Goal by Allahu Goldratt, and I apologize for mispronouncing his name. I think even though it's about industrial manufacturing, some of it applies, but the idea of constraints in a system is applicable to any job that you have in operations and analytics. It's around identifying what are holding you back, what's stopping us from being a $5 billion company, and asking that, and then really drilling down several times to figure out, okay, what actually is our constraint in our system that's stopping it. That leads me to the next one, which is the lean startup, which I really enjoyed. And the idea of the 5 whys and really that practice of drilling deeper. So if you combine the two, you find your constraint and then you can drill in deeper and deeper and deeper and really identify what is stopping you from reaching the scale that you want to achieve. And then another one I really enjoy is extreme ownership. I'm a full believer that ownership is not mutually exclusive. I think you can share 100% ownership on something. And if you take that mindset, that's how you build the trust that we were talking about earlier with the product teams, because you want them to be successful in the same way that they want to be successful. So if you share that ownership with them, not split 50-50, but shared 100% each, that's how you can really build trust with someone. And then I would also say at the end, I read a lot of fiction, sci-fi, fantasy. I think that really grounds you on what is today in the regular like fiction. What is the world like? Think about, live in, and approach the world that you're in. And then the sci-fi and fantasy is really thinking about what could the world be, and open your mind to those different philosophies and different approaches around what what could be as opposed to what is today. And what does that look like on if some of these things were to happen? Uh, I mean, sci-fi is grounded in the ethics of what happens with some of these technologies. And in this day and age around AI, it's something that we always have to have top of mind.
theme of all your recommendations seem to be more of what's stopping you, solid recommendations. Three key pieces of advice you would like to share with our listeners who aspire to excel in the field of business ops and analytics.
Absolutely. I think number one, solve business problems. You're not solving a problem to solve a problem. You're not running an analysis to run an analysis. Drill deeper, use those 5 whys to understand what you're actually solving. Work and build that trust and take that ownership with them to understand what is actually their pain. What are they trying to accomplish? And if you can solve the business problem, then you're really solving that thing that's moving the needle. The second one I would say is always prioritize what's best for your company, even if it's maybe not what's best for you. If you come with that no ego mindset of saying, I want what's best for the company, again, it's going back to that trust that you're building with the teams. You want what's best for them. You want what's best for me. It's what's best for the company. And that should be your North Star at all times. And finally, I touched on a little bit before, but again, ownership is so important. It is what should drive everything that you're doing, but it's not mutually exclusive. I cannot emphasize that enough. And that if you are collaborating and taking ownership, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take the fall, but you shouldn't be worried about the implications of things going wrong. You should be able to take risks and still have that ownership across the company. And if you do that, you'll build trust, you'll be an effective communicator. People will look to you to help solve those business problems because you've developed that sense of ownership.
Well, that brings us to the end of this insightful episode of Go to Masters. Big thanks to Daniel for sharing his experiences and valuable insights. Remember, you can tune in every week to learn more from the game changers driving hypergrowth companies across the globe. Go to Masters is brought to you by Everstage, your trusted partner for transforming the way businesses handle sales commissions. I'm your host, signing off.